Good morning, everybody. I welcome you to this third webinar. I will start this webinar with a round of introduction and setting the scene for the rest of the day and give you a view on what we are about to do. This will be a bit different for those who've seen the previous webinars because we don't do any presentations today, but try to do some live work actually. But before we go into the details of the webinar, I will do the introduction of the panel that is, and I start with Jonas Jederberg, who is attending here on behalf of the Swedish Transport Administration, Trafikverket, and he will later on show you how you can do message validation in DATEX2 and how you can do code generation to create a service actually. And we have with us Ian Cornwall, who is in DATEX2 on behalf of Highways England, and he will show you how to create a client that will access the service. And the two guys will use different environments. So Jonas will work with C# and .NET, and Ian will work in a Java environment to show you a little bit how this works across different environments. Then my name is Josef Kaltwasser. I am in DATEX2 on behalf of the German Federal Highways Research Institute, BUST. And I will start the webinar off with showing you how to actually use the DATEX2 toolchain to create the artifacts that the other guys will then later on use to create software out of it. But I will also start with showing you a bit through the DATEX2 website and show you the different documentation and tools that are on the DATEX2 website that you can use to actually produce the software that you need for a DATEX2 exchange. So we are, if you want, the technical panel that will do the live demonstrations today. Together with us, we have two colleagues, Jörg Freudenstein, always also here on behalf of the BUST, and Martin van Ecklenburg. Martin, it's interesting, you're listed here as Rijkswaterstaat. You are working for the National Data Warehouse, so I don't know, it's probably because of the membership in the DATEX2 PSA that they list you under Rijkswaterstaat. Martin and Jörg will manage the questions and answers section that you can use. You will have a questions and answers box at the bottom of your screen. We want this to be a very, very interactive webinar today. So please use it to make comments or raise questions. Jörg and Martin will monitor the Q&A box during the whole meeting, and they will actually interrupt us. So we will not do this kind of one person speaks and everyone else is silenced today. We will chat a little bit. So if you raise questions, Jörg and Martin will throw them in and we will answer them on the fly. If there is more in-depth discussion needed, we do have a Q&A section at the end of the webinar. Then we can also have some more discussions, right? A little bit about the program we have today. I will start off with the introduction into the DATEX2 website documentation, but also in the download section, where you can download the various tools that you need to work with DATEX2, and show you around that. And then we will start creating a little DATEX2 model. And well, since we are a bit more technology focused today, we will do a Hello World model. All the programmers amongst you will know that if you learn a new language, the first thing you do is you create a program that writes Hello World on the screen. So we will do one that creates a DATEX message where you can put Hello World in. Then what I will show you is how to plug the various modules together that you need for that. I will talk a bit about the various different interoperability levels that we have in DATEX2. So I'll show you the existing modules, but we also do some extensions, both backwards compatible extensions, what in DATEX2 is denoted as level B extensions, but also complete non-backwards compatible extensions called level C. And we show you how to create these UML models in a proper way so that you can use the DATEX toolchain. Yeah. And then later on, I'll show you that toolchain. So we will walk through the process of creating the artifacts that Ian and Jonas in the later parts of the webinar will use to create the software that exchanges the DATEX2 messages. And we will also touch a bit upon profiling and selection of model elements. And then I will hand over to Jonas. And Jonas will show you a little bit of how the elements that I have showed in my presentation end up in the programming artifacts. We will use the XML environment for this webinar, so he will show you or create some messages from the schemas that I have produced. And he will show you how the different interoperability levels work in terms of message validation. And then he will also show you the type of errors that can occur, right? We should be, at that point in time, we should be around 10:40, and then we foreseen a 20 minutes coffee break up till 11 o'clock. And then 11 o'clock, we will reconvene, and then Jonas will start with the source code generation for the service in C# for .NET environment. And he will create some services out of the schemas we have created. And he will also deploy these services so that they are available. And I guess he can show you the URLs, and then you can actually invoke them in the browser if you want. And then we hand over to Ian, and Ian will use the same schemas to create a client that runs against the services. He will use the Java environment, and he will show you how the various validation aspects that Jonas has already shown on the XML level, how they appear inside the software of a client, right? When we're good in keeping all our time, then that should be around 11:40. That leaves us about 20 minutes for questions and answers and discussions, right? And also the things we are showing, the little examples, etc., will be made available on GitHub. And I think we could have a little bit of discussion and introduction about that, Martin, maybe later on in the Q&A session, right? And what I will do is I will show you the DATEX2 website. So, as I said, we want to do modeling, concrete modeling examples. So you have to find your way on how to do that on the DATEX2 website. And if you go to datex2.eu and you find the support menu, and that should be the entry point for you if you want to do some modeling yourself in DATEX2, right? There is a getting started that should help you. One important source of information is the DATEX2 Academy. So if I click on that, then you will see a lot of information. There's a huge site really with a lot of information that can help you and maybe answer questions, and it also provides you with the tools you need to work with DATEX2. If you look in the upper left corner, we have structured this website a little bit into levels so that we can address different types of users. And if you start at the level 0, that is the overview thing. So if you need an overview about DATEX2 and some abstract top level information, that's the point where you should start. Level 1 is a little bit more practical for those people who really have the task to create DATEX2 publications. And then level 2 is where you really go into the documentation of the various modules that we have in DATEX2. So if I pick, for example, situation, which is the mostly used probably, traffic situations, events like accidents and whatever you, then you get a lot of information and documentation about this model. Yeah. So this is really where you would want to inform yourself about the different modules that we have in DATEX2 and what is in it. You need to do that because if you want to create a DATEX2 publication, you have to choose which of those modules you actually need for your publication. Yeah? And then once you've taken that decision, the question is, how does that all work together? How is it plugged together? And then you in level 3, you have this detailed information for the expert user, where you have, for example, the extension guide that gives you a bit of documentation about what we will show later on. You have the profiling guide, the same thing for the profiling. And you have, and that's an important one, the modeling methodology. And this one is, if you want the document, the open, publicly available documentation that corresponds to the DATEX standard 16.15.7-1. Yeah? And here you will actually find the rules for the things that we show practically later on. Yeah? If I go back to the homepage, then the direct entry point into the place where you can download information is the download section. Yeah? And if you go there, then you have to choose the DATEX 2 version that you want to work with. The current one is 3.1. And then you end up in this page where you have a lot of tools available. And in particular, the starting section is where you can select to download the individual DATEX 2 modules, right? So if you look into that, if you know the DATEX standards, you will recognize that these are exactly the modules that represent the DATEX European norms, right? So I said 16.15.7-1 is the methodology, and then -2 is the location referencing system. That's this one. And then you have a -3, which is the situation module, which is here. And you have -4, which is the VMS module down there. And -5, which is the road traffic data module up here. -6 is parking, and as you can take from this note, parking is currently under revision. It should have been the original plan, according to the original planning, it should of course now have been here, but it is a bit delayed because we have a interesting cooperation now with the Alliance for Parking Data Standards, which will really produce a much better model, and a model that is related to the industry, but that caused some delay. So this is why it is not here yet. Then part 7 is the common toolbox of DATEX 2 that every DATEX 2 model will have to use. And this is up there. And down here in the bottom, you see some experimental modules which relate to 2 technical standards that have last year been published by another CEN working group 17, which deal with urban extensions, just at the bottom, traffic management plans, and the rerouting management enhanced, which is a bit like, I would say the TM 2.0 or Socrates 2.0 cooperation model between traffic management and navigation services. Yeah. These three packages were actually taken from CEN 16.15.7-8, a technical specification that you can that has been published last year. And we also have another one, -9, and that deals with traffic signals. And this package essentially, for those of you who have deal with CITS, sometimes this actually contains a DATEX model for the map and SPAT messages from CITS. Yeah. These are still experimental, so they are TS, they are not ENs yet, and therefore they are also not part of the level A interoperability or compatibility domains. So if you plug those things together, you create a standard DATEX level A model. If you add the modules down here, you actually leave that domain, and because they're still experimental, and you create a level C model. What these levels mean, we see later on in today's webinar, right? Then the question now is, if you have really gone through the level 2 documentation here, read through this detailed description, considered what type of publication you intend to do, You have made your choice. And now the question is, how do we plug these things together? For today's webinar, we will only use common. That is the minimum to create a DATEX 2 level A model. But obviously, if in reality you would normally have a stack of at least 3 modules, you would use common. You would normally always use location referencing, since every sensible application in the traffic and transport domain normally requires a location referencing. And then you choose the actual domain package like situation or VMS or road traffic data. And then you have a stack of 3 modules, and you would plug them together in a UML tool. If you want to do DATEX 2 modeling, you have to use the enterprise architect tool of Spark Systems. So it is a little bit of a problem. You have to buy this tool. We cannot create our own UML tool, but it is not a very expensive one, so that's probably acceptable. If you just want to look at the model, by the way, I should show that, you don't have to buy the tool because you can do that online. Yeah. So you have you can go to this site here, and then you have the whole set of modules available here. So you see the situation. Here we have the common and location referencing, and here we have in payload publication, we have the domain modules, including, by the way, parking. So that is the old parking standard transferred to version 3, but it is not yet reworked. And here you have the experimental stuff in the extension package. And you can go through that online, and you don't need the tool. Actually, it works quite well, I must say. So if you just want to have a look at the DATEX classes, how they stick together, get more information about attributes, details, you can do it here without the need for any tool. If you really want to do an extension, you have to have the Enterprise Architect tool. And now I show you how this works. And this is what we need this DATEX 2 empty platform independent model.eap for. EAP is the file extension of the files that this UML tool creates. And now what I do is I download that to my desktop, but I give it another name. I'll call it, let's say, webinar EAP. Right. Okay. Now, as the name says, it's empty. So we need at least one module, and we always need common. So I'll download the common module as well to the same place, the desktop. And now let me show that. Now you see here is the EAP, and here is the common module. If you wonder why it is an XML, well, I can show that. Just to give you a hint, the packages, if you want to swap them and plug them together, are exchanged via a standard format, which is an XML format, and therefore the file name extension is XML. And this format is called XML metadata interchange. Yeah? And it is a format that is used to exchange, if I click this down here, UML models, right? As you can see, unfortunately, the standard should actually allow you to use other tools like Enterprise Architect, but unfortunately, it has, despite the standardized model element, it also has a huge extension model. If you look at the line numbers, it's about 23,000 lines. And so this extension, unfortunately, is specific to the tool. So we will I would not recommend. You can try using another tool with XMI, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. Now, let's go into the webinar EAP, which is so far still empty. And I open Enterprise Architect. If you want to go through the steps that we are showing today, and you have another version of Enterprise Architect, this one is version 14, but I think there is a new one out already, version 15. Then it might be that the user interface looks a bit different. Yeah. So then what you should do is remember the name of the function and search, and then you'll probably find it just in another place. So here is what the empty DATEX model looks like. So you see it has the the top level package for D2 payload. We only talk, or mainly talk, about the content of DATEX data exchange today. Maybe we have another webinar later on to talk about the actual exchange elements. And the content of a DATEX2 message, that's what we call the payload. So this is the top level namespace of a D2 message payload. And it has two packages inside there. It has the payload publication package where you put your modules in, but unfortunately it's still empty. And we have the extension package, which is also empty. You see there's some diagrams here, but these are only explanatory. So they only have explanatory content, put it that way. Yeah. Okay. There is no classes or anything in here yet. But this is why I downloaded the common module. So I have to load this. But before that, I show you something else. I have, if you want, downloaded an empty framework, but I've also downloaded, and that's very important when I go to the resources tag, the UML profile for DATEX2. This is actually the DATEX2 meta model. So this is the toolkit of model elements that you use to create a DATEX2 model. Yeah? And if you want to understand how this meta model works, you should go to the website and read the methodology section here, because if you scroll down here a bit, there's just then you find the meta modeling section here. And here you see the presentation of this DATEX2 meta model in terms of a UML profile that is creating stereotypes for various UML meta classes. That is really your DATEX2 modeling toolbox, right? Okay, so we will use that later on, but now I want to include the common package. Yeah? And how do I do this? I select the namespace, the top level package, and it is very important if you deal with modules, loading, exporting, importing modules, you always have to select the proper package, which is the top level package, or else you create some strange effects maybe. And then I go to the publish ribbon, and here I have the export XMI command at hand. Yeah? And that's the one that I'm going to use. So I go and to my desktop, select the common module, open it, and import it. Yeah. Takes a little while to load the common module. And now you see what has happened. We have the common module here in the appropriate place in the model. It is not intended as a payload publication, therefore it is on top. If I'd loaded location referencing, it would also be here. If I loaded then any of the publication modules like situation, VMS, they would appear down here. Yeah? But we don't need that. I'll show that now. If we look into the common package, well, here is all sorts of classes now in the package itself and in sub packages. And I can open this classes diagram. Maybe I zoom it a bit. And now,
Joseph, can I just interrupt? We have
yeah,
a question. We have a question from Dominic who asks, I think you said it, but I think it's just to check for sure for everyone. It is important what is selected in the project browser before starting the import, right?
Yes.
That's the point where the loaded XMI would be placed.
Yeah, exactly. Therefore, it is, I think, yeah, you have to select the way you create them. You have to select the top package, which is payload, and then you import it there. And it is even more important when you do the export, because you always export the selected package. We see that later on. Yeah? So yes, you're right. It is very important to make sure that you have the proper package selected when you use any of these functions. Okay, so now I wanted to come to one question which is very often put it, but if you see a DATEX model, and I showed the online model, which is a huge one, of course, because it has all available modules plugged together, yeah, you get enormously huge models with hundreds of classes and many hundreds of attributes and thousands of enumeration literals. And people say, where does that start? Where is the entry point into a model? Yeah. Well, obviously, you need that anyway if you really want to create a message and send a message across the wire. Then you have to determine what is the class that I start with. And the way that is done in the DATEX2 methodology is to assign the D2 model root stereotype to a class. Yeah? So that indicates that this class is an entry point into the model. And in the methodology, this just defines this mechanism. So you could, in a level C model, you could create your own D2 model root. Yeah, but for the DATEX2 standard packages, we have a standard mechanism, and that is this class payload publication. If you look carefully, the name of the class is set in italics, which means the class is abstract. Yeah? That means you cannot instantiate this class, so it is only meant as the, let's say, the template for the entry points into the publications. If you then now load the domain modules, like let's say situation, then you have a class situation publication, which is a specialization of this payload publication. And therefore, you have the same mechanism in all, to define the entry points in all modules. If that was it, then I would have to take one of those domain modules now to actually create the hello world example. But what you see at the bottom is this class here called generic publication. As you can see, the name is not set in italics, so that is a concrete class. I can actually create an instance of generic publication, and that is a specialization of payload publication. Therefore, we use this little hook here to create a very simple level A entry point. Yeah. If you look into the XML, which we will do later on, then you will find that the name, independent, if you play around with it, independent of which domain module you use and which publication you use, the name of the entry point in the XML schema is always a payload. And that is because the model root defines the entry points, even as an abstract superclass. And the name of the top level XML element is governed by this property of the stereotype, which is currently set to payload. So if you send that to foo or bar, then you will get a schema where the top level element is named foo or bar, right? Good. So this is now, we have a little model, the common model, and we actually have a publication that we could use to create an entry point into a message. So this is actually all we need. This is the, if you want, the minimum DATEX2 level A model. Yeah, and I will use that to show you how the tool chain works. Yeah, so we do one round of that. So I go to the browser, make sure that I have a top level package selected, and now I use the export XMI function. I will export it to the desktop, and I will name it webinar level A .xml, but in reality what it produces again is an XMI version of the model, right? So let's do this. Push the export. Make sure that you have XMI 2.1 selected. Yeah, that is since, I don't know, 10 years or something. I think we are using UML2 and XMI2 before DATEX. So that's ready now. And if I go back to my desktop, then I've now created this webinar level A XMI export of my model, which at the moment is just the minimum model with the common module. Yeah. So now that's fine. You have a model expert, but that doesn't help you. You cannot create any client or server software out of that. That is the point where you need the DATEX toolbox. And in order to show you that, I go back to the download section and then scroll down a little bit to the middle of this page, and then you see here a link to the DATEX to the schema generation tool. The name is historically grown. It actually does a lot more than just schema generation nowadays, but the name was given once and we continue with it. It is on the DATEX website. You can reach it also via, let me look. Tooling, right? And then you can use the DATEX 2 version 3 schema generation tool. Click on reset. Okay, now it is a kind of assistant dialogue that takes you through the process in 7 steps. And the first step is to select the model. Yeah? There are some predefined models available which you don't have to upload, but in our case now for the webinar, we will of course select our own model as an XMI file, which we just created, which is the webinar level A.xml. Okay, so we load this one and click next. In the second step, you can load a selection file. Later on, I'll show you how you do a selection for profiling. And if you do that, you can save this profiling status that you've got in a file called the selection file. And in this step, you can load again that file, and therefore then you can iterate your work. Yeah, sometimes selections take hours and you want to have a break maybe, and then it's better to save the file. So you can download, upload or load your working status and continue with the profiling. Yeah? Then we have 2 sections, 3 and 4, which are, I would say, convenience sections that help you in the profiling process. You find things here like recommended reference profiles and recommended service profiles and location profiles, but that has all been shown in the previous webinar. So I will not, today I will not go into these steps 3 and 4. I will always just click the next button. And then in 5, you actually end up in the place where you do the actual selection. Yeah? And that is something I don't do it now, but later on I will show you how this works in practice. Okay, and then next again, then we come to the option section. The option, what is most important about the option section is that you select the target platform here. We will show you everything today based on XML. But you can also create JSON schema instead of XML schema, and you can even do an export into ASN.1, which is experimental. It has just been added end of last year, I think. And therefore, you would get an ASN.1 source code if you want export of the model that you then could use to create other types of transfer syntax like packed encoding rules, basic encoding rules, or what have you. Also very important is this little box in the middle here, which you can tick to save the selection file. This is the file that you can load in step 2, right? So if you want to have it, I don't need it here because I have made a selection, but I'll show you later on how it works. Then you click this box, and then last step is next. And what has happened now is the tool has created the things that you need to build your software, right? You have a log of what the tool did in the background, but you can also find that this log is also added to the download zip later on. What is important here to note is you get the compliance level. That is very important. Yeah. So the tool said, okay, this model is compliant with level A. That's quite important, of course. And as I said, the log is also in the zip. So we continue here with saving the zip. There is unfortunately, you cannot choose where it is saved. It is always saved in the downloads folder. Okay, and I have the meeting, so I don't need this one anymore. Okay, and then I will rename that accordingly. So I will call it webinar level A zip. And now I take that back to my desktop and look into the zip and see what it contains. And what you find here, first of all, is the log again. Yeah, so you can always, oops, unfortunately, it's on the wrong screen. Can look at what the tool has done. Yeah, you see the compliance assessment. Yeah, Jonas, can you tell me why we see that 3 times? Is that because we have 3 packages?
Yeah, it's because we already check when you first select the file that it is valid.
Okay, so it did that a couple of times, actually.
Yeah.
But then at the end, when I press the start button, this section here starts, and you see a lot of checks. Yeah. If you go to the methodology page, let me do that for you. If you go to the one, go to the methodology page, then you will find that the methodology is actually expressed as a lot of rules. Yeah, that determine whether an arbitrary UML model is a valid DATEX2 model. Yeah, and what the tool is doing here is checking these rules. Yeah, and it does a lot of checks, and at the end, it creates the schemas for you. Yeah? And you see, okay, it has checked 56 classes, so common contains 56 classes, right? Okay, so that's fine. That's the that is the log. And the other things are the schemas that have been created. It's 2 of them now. One for the top level namespace, the D2 payload, and that is the entry point into each DATEX2. That is and always the entry into a DATEX2 model, the payload XSD. And what it does, well, it actually, first of all, it defines the target namespace, which is D2 payload. It creates or defines the top level element named payload. As we've seen before, that it was because the payload publication property is set to that name. And it gives you the type, which is always payload publication, which is the abstract class where the concrete classes are specialized from. This is one of a typical situation where we use polymorphism in DATEX2, and DATEX2 is using polymorphism really, really strongly. Yeah, and then you have the import of common. If you had other modules, you had a list of imports. Yeah, if we open the other schema that has been created, that is the common schema. Yeah. Okay, and now what we see here is we do find the generic. If you want to scroll through DATEX schemas, it's important to know that it is a list of type declarations and they are ordered alphabetically. That is the only thing that gives you a chance to. Oh, you can search, obviously. So here we have the generic publication. That is the one that we're going to use later on with the publication name attribute. And you have a you can see here that it is an extension of the payload publication. And this is why I'm allowed, or Jonas is doing that later on when he creates instances. This is why he can create an instance of the top level element payload of type generic publication. And the payload publication is a little bit down here. Yeah. And here you find the attributes. Yeah? You have a feed description, feed type. That were the attributes that I've shown you in the UML. Feed type I will use later on to show you how selection works, because that's an optional attribute, and we will later on remove it from the schemas, right? Good. So we have done a full round to create a level A schema. We have not profiled it yet. So actually you would not have needed to do that. You could download this, but it was just to show you how the toolchain works. And now what the next step is to go into the aspect of extensions, right? So if we will later on do profiling as well. So normally you choose the modules that you need for your publication, and you go to the selection step to select those elements that you really need for your publication. You should not include elements, optional elements, into your schema if your system can never generate them. Yeah, because the schema should actually express your model. If it is mandatory elements like the publication time, for example, you have to provide them. Your system has to provide them if it is a DATEX 2 system. Yeah? But for feed type, for example, they do not have to be provided. They're optional. And therefore, you can say, in my system, I don't have that. And then you can deselect it, and it will not appear at all in the schema, as we can see later on. Yeah? But what will happen then is, or what often happens is, you take the modules that you want to use, you do your profiling to stick to the elements that you've got, but then you find there is 1 or 2 or 3 attributes that you definitely need for your application, which are not available in DATEX 2. So what you would like to do is you would like to add them on top of the model, but without breaking interoperability or compatibility. And that is possible in DATEX 2 by using extensions. So if I go to the extensions package here, what I can do is I can actually do an extension of another class. And for example, for our example, we use the generic publication. So I pull it over here. This is, I have not created anything new now, right? This is just that I made this class, which already is in the model, as you could see in the left, now here available for modeling purposes. And now I want to extend that. Because I need a string attribute called greeting, and that should carry the string hello world. Yeah. So how do I do that? I now go to the UML profile. This is my main toolbox to do DATEX 2 modeling. And I say, okay, I want a new class, a D2 class. Then I just pull it over here from the toolbox. Now I give it a good name. And there is, that is dialog appeared somewhere else. There is a convention that if you extend classes, you could give it theoretically every name, yeah. But there is a convention that if you extend a class, you call it like the original class, extended. Yeah? So generic publication, extended. And now I have to tell DATEX, the DATEX toolchain, that I want this as an extension of that class, as a level B extension, a backwards compatible extension, and therefore I use a special, the level B extension. Now I've created a specialization, but it is a stereotype specialization, stereotype level B. So I've told the system that I want this to be a level B extension of this class. As I spoke about the DATEX rules, one of the rules says, for example, if you create a new class, you always have to give it a definition. If I wouldn't put anything into the definition property, then the tool would complain. Yeah? But, well, we have here. Now I want to define the attribute that I put into the extension. So I take an attribute, put it here, call it greeting, right? And I have to give it a type, and unfortunately, the things pop up on the wrong screen. So I use the string type, default string type in DATEX 2. So I go to common data types. String is a generic data type, and I select this. Now I have created an attribute greeting. and it is a of type string. Again, there are some rules that I have to obey to.
Just want to say something. You can also search in that pop-up that Joseph just showed. You don't always have to browse to
Yeah,
the
you can
data types.
also search. Yeah. That's true. But somehow it is old habits die hard. It's not efficient the way that I do it. So listen to what Martin says. Definition, webinar, def, and if you define attributes, you have to give them an order, but there is only one attribute, so just give it, let's say, 0. Now I've created a valid DATEX model. I save that, and this is a level B model. Yeah, so I can now save that and go through the process again. Yeah. No, I do not want to use it. Do that. I want to call it level B. Okay. And I can now show what happened. I go to the DATEX to wizard again. And use the
Yeah,
thing
we
that I've
have a
created.
question from Dominic. If the connector also needs an order. Yes, I think that's true. The connectors usually need an order tag value.
No.
But not the level B extension.
No,
this is a special connection.
These are specialization connectors, and they do not have any orders. If there are other relation meta classes used, for example, compositions, and they need an order as well. But the specialization connectors never need an order. Okay, I'll skip through the process again. And now save this. And call it level B. And extract the content. And now what you see is we have the same thing as before, but we also have an extension schema. Yeah? The reason for that is that we have made an extension. What you see here in the level B extension case is that we have the new type that we've created, the generic publication extended class with a greeting attribute. But you might wonder, where is the link to the generic publication? There's nothing saying it is a specialization. Well, a level B extension indeed is not a specialization. So if you want to see how the link is created, I have to open the common XSD, and then now we go to the generic publication. And then what you find is that if you compare that to the level A case, go back here again, then the general purpose extension package that is at the end of every DATEX2 class has now been replaced by a very by a special type. Now, underlined class names indicate that this class, this complex type has been generated by the tool, not by the user, and it is a specific one for generic publication extensions. Yeah, and this class, if we go back, this class actually now contains the generic publication extended. So what has happened is we have the class now in the extension package, and it is integrated in the extension slot of the superclass, rather than actually creating a real specialization as an extension type in XML. And that is the trick that makes the thing backwards compatible, as Jonas will show you later on. Right? So that's fine. So that is how a level B extension is actually implemented in the schemas. And now we can go back to the wizard. And what I want to show you now is how profiling works in DATEX2, how a selection works. So I use the same file. I use the level B XMI as a starting point. But now I will do a selection. So what is a selection? What is profiling? Profiling means that you exclude optional elements from the model that you will never use. And I said earlier, for example, the feed type, if my system will never create a feed type value, I can just deselect it here. Yeah. And that is the tick is green. That means it is an optional element and I can deselect it. If it is a mandatory element like the default language, it is gray and I cannot deselect it. But optional elements can be deselected. Yeah,
yeah, that's what I want to ask. Can you open this one to show it?
This one.
No, the general publication.
Yeah, I do. I show you something else actually. There is a second thing that you can do. It is a bit tricky because it is specific to XML as a platform at the moment. The other platforms don't support that. But what I will show you now for our new attribute greeting, if I open the attribute options, I can show you that for simple types, we can also narrow down the value space or the lexical space using facets. And the one that I will use here is a pattern facet, which means it's more or less a regular expression that governs the content of the string. And the one that I want to use here, so we say hello world. So what do I need for hello world? I would allow uppercase letters, I would allow lowercase letters, and I would allow a blank. Yeah? And I would obviously not want only one letter. So I have asterisk to indicate that is an arbitrary length. And this pattern now governs, it reduces the value space of this attribute. Yeah? It's again backwards compatible because each message that will successfully validate against this restriction obviously also validates against the unrestricted model. Yeah? So I can restrict things, but I cannot expand things in profiling. Yeah? Okay, so I change, save that. And now I have actually done a selection. And whenever you do work on selections, you should save the work that you've done. So you should click on that box. Right. Okay, and now we will save the whole thing.
Yeah, just another question that's been asked in the chat, Joseph. Is the selection step in the wizard a convenience method to edit the schema? So you could theoretically remove items from the profile by deleting them directly from the XMI in the editor.
In the schema, you mean? Yeah, in the XMI, yes. Obviously, yes. I mean, we are working on the XMI, but I honestly speaking, well, it depends. XMI is hard stuff, so I would really
probably in the model.
Yeah, in the schema, yeah, that's true, that's possible. But the point is, you can very quickly corrupt the schema if you edit it manually, and therefore we totally discourage doing that. Use the tool, work on the UML, work with the tool, the DATEX wizard, and then you will always be sure that the schemas that are created are a proper DATEX2. If you start manually working on the schemas, you will very quickly corrupt it, and then you will probably create interoperability problems with other systems. Yeah? Okay, so I've just put it in here. I give it.
And you will use the level A compatibility in if you do that, or level B compatibility. Yeah, so you should use the wizard. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can of course do the same things that I do via the toolchain now manually, in principle. And, okay, so that is the level B profile. And I'll put that to the desktop and extract it. And now we see what is here. Well, here's the selection, by the way. Yeah, so that is the file that you can load. If I would want to continue working on this profile, I would load this selection file in step 2. And then the selections I made, the pattern and so on, and deselection of this one attribute, they would be there. I want to show you in the schema, of course. The question already shows me that you know what's coming. We go to common in this case, and now what you see is if I scroll down to the payload publication, here it is, then you see the feed type is missing. Yeah? So if we compare that with the level A payload publication, you see the structure that we've seen in the UML: feed description, feed type, publication type, and now the new version has only feed description, publication type. Yeah? Obviously, it has just deleted an element here, and that, of course, you can do that manually. You can manipulate the created schemas, but as I said, it's you have to be very, very careful, and it does not help you. I think the care that you have to take to make sure that you don't corrupt the schema is more time than it takes to use the tool chain properly instead of an XML editor. Yeah? So please don't do that. Okay, so that is the one thing. The second thing that I had created was the this pattern, and I show you that as well. So that is obviously an extension class. So here now you see the greeting attribute as we've seen it before, but it has the pattern as a restriction of the simple type. So that is the power of profiling, is that you can narrow down choices to those that your system really supports, and it is fully guaranteed that every valid instance valid to your schemas is also valid to the unprofiled one. Yeah, so you do not break interoperability with these restrictions, but probably not with the patterns, but definitely with deselecting optional elements, because there are huge amounts of optional elements in DATEX 2. And if you deselect those that you do never need in your publication and give this profile schema to the developers of the clients that want to connect into your feed, they have definitely much less complexity to handle. And that is why you should never use a downloaded huge schema if your system doesn't support all elements in there. And I don't know any actual system that uses all elements. Yeah? So always create a profile describing your publication in the ways that we've shown today. And what the impact it has on the source code of the developers that create services and the clients that run against the services we'll see later on in the demonstrations. Yeah. All right. So I will go back to the enterprise architect, right? And now, so what we've created here is called a level B extension. So it is a backwards compatible in the sense that this specialization here is not mapped to the ordinary extension mechanism of XML schema. Because if I'd done that, I would break compatibility to the original schema, And as you will see later on by demonstrations of Jonas, this does not break the interoperability. Obviously, sometimes that is used when you have a module, you want to stick to the standard, you have a module, the module does almost the job you need, but there is few things to add. And then you can use that mechanism. A good example of a very frequently used example is, for example, location referencing. Yeah. So if you want a DATEX 2 publication, you should use location referencing from the standard, maybe coordinate-based, GML-based, or maybe OpenLR or whatever. But it may be that in your particular country, there is a very specific scheme used, which is not known outside your country, but you want to add it. So that for the people, for the clients in your own country, they can use this national system. Yeah? Then you use a level B extension. Yeah? And you make sure that you use some understandable to all location referencing schemes like coordinates or OpenLR, but you add your own system for location referencing, and then the people that are aware of the system, they can use your schema to create software and make use of the extension, and the others, because it is still backwards compatible, simply skip over it. Yeah. If you do a completely new model, if you maybe take some basic DATEX stuff like common as a start, but you want to do something totally different, which is really not level B, then you can simply start even extending classes, doing other things, adding, manipulating classes, but then you're no longer backwards compatible. I will demonstrate this. I will add another class, which for this particular purpose, I will simply call another class. And still, I still want to be DATEX. Yeah, I still have to fulfill the rules, in that case, to give a definition for a class, which in my case always will be webinar dev today. Yeah. I can add an attribute as we've done before, another text. Now I try the search button. Where is it? Find. Exactly. That's really good. That's faster. I like that. Okay. So we have another text. I again have to give a definition and an order. But the difference now is that I don't care for the level B thing. And therefore, I don't use the level B extension. I just use an ordinary specialization. I'm a bit thinking about it nowadays. I would like to have an empty stereotyped specialization in the profile here, but we didn't do that a long time ago. What we did is we said, okay, if you want to do that, you use the ordinary tool. This is the UML toolbox of Enterprise Architect. That is the generalization, and then you just do it that way. Yeah. Now you see, it is the same generalization element, but not stereotype level B extension, and therefore I know now already this is no longer backwards compatible. Yeah, due to polymorphism in the place where people expect a payload publication, they could now find another class which they do not know of. But what it actually means, we will see later on. I will go through the process one more time. I'm sorry. And I'll call it level C. And now I will, it should be on desktop. Yeah, here it is. And now I go to the tool, to the wizard, and load this one. And what you can see is already here in the log, the tool has detected that this is a level C. It is not compliant with level A. Okay. And I take these from downloads. Put it on my desktop, extract it. And now going here, the first thing you note is probably the different file names of the schemas. Yeah, if you have a non level A compliant model, it will create a level C underline 3 names rather than DATEX 2 underline 3. Yeah. The second difference, if I show you the umbrella schema, is obviously the target namespace. Yeah, so it's now a level C prefixed namespace. Yeah, and if we also look into the extension package, then you see we have both types of extensions now. Yeah, we have the generic publication, sorry, the complex type generic publication extended that we had created. And as I explained earlier, there is no mentioning of the generic publication or anywhere here. Yeah? If you want to see how this class is embedded in the generic publication, you have to go back to the generic publication specification to the extension slot to see that. Now another class that I added here, that is now just an ordinary XML schema extension of the base type generic publication. Yeah? And due to the polymorphism that we have in DATEX 2, it's obvious that this is no longer backwards compatible, because in any place where so far you could find or place a generic publication, you can now also place another class. And the software that does not know this extension would be unprepared, and or let's say the validation would fail already. You see that later on when Jonas does the demonstration. But if you would skip validation, which you should never do in your client, then your software would somehow run into an error sooner or later. Yeah? So that is, I think, the difference between a level B extension that we've done here and the level C extension which we've done there. Very good. Then I would hand over to Jonas, who will now show us a little bit about what all these schema things that are shown actually mean in terms of validation, right? And Jonas, you should be able to.
Yep. So I'm going to show you some XML validation, and I'm going to use the same files that Joseph has created, the schemas. And I show you now directly. They are available at the GitHub at this address. So here in the models, you have the examples that Joseph had created. So I have downloaded those to my machine, and we should look at different types of XML instances and schemas. I will be using XML Spy from Altova, but you can use whatever XML tool you like. We saw that Joseph is using Oxygen, and that works fine as well. Let's see. Here, XML validation. I open the schemas for level A.
While you search for that, we have some remarks in the Q&A. Fabrizio stated that my level C extension is a bit academic. Yes, of course. He said in real world you would use level C to manage information which are outside the road and travel information. Yes, level C is if you do something very different. Yeah, we've used it once, for example, to create a model for dangerous goods transport, but that is inside road and travel. So I would say that is yeah, but I just wanted to show on a limited scale of model what is actually going on. Yeah.
Let's see now what my XML spy is doing. Oh, now it's loading. Okay. Soon, at least now, I have the level A schema loaded, and we can see the root element payload and the namespaces for level A. What I usually do when I start creating an XML instance is to either take an example already created, or I create a new example by the tool. So you can do that by going to File, New, and choose an XML file. And then I can choose to base this XML instance on a schema. Now, okay. And now I have this schema already loaded, so I can choose a window and select that one. And now the tool will generate an instance from what it found in the schema. So you could get a little bit, it depends on what you have in the schema, you can say. And we can see that he has created the root element payload, which is fine, and it takes the namespaces. But it depends then on what kind of example the tool creates, which namespaces you got. So if a tip is, if you don't get all namespaces, you can copy them from the schema. So you can go in here and take the definitions here, for example, put them in your instance. If you don't get all that you need, if you start changing now. But then if we go on, we see the XSCI type, which is telling which type of payload publication we are going to use and create. And now we can see that there are only two available, and we know that payload publication is abstract, so we can't instantiate it. But if I try, I get a validation error. Yeah, doesn't validate. You see it in red here. So we are going to create the generic publication. And then we got language, which is empty. And if I validate, it will complain that we can't have an empty language. It complains on model-based version first, but okay, let's do that. That has to be 3 for DATEX 2, version 3. And the language, we can use EN, English. And we can test to validate. And it still doesn't validate because the publication time is not valid. It's not a valid date time. It's an empty string currently. So we have to enter a valid date time, something like this.
Meanwhile, there was a remark for Fabrizio that the new parking model from APDS, from the Alliance for Parking Data Standard, is a level C model. So we have a first application that is inside the travel domain.
Mm. And if we validate now, it actually says that this file is valid. So this is the minimum thing that we need to validate. But now we see that we have empty strings here. So they are valid, but they are not that good. So I would put some values in country, for example. Let's take Sweden today. A national identifier could be good to say DATEX or something. And of course, we can give a publication name. So let's say level A publication. And now we have a working XML instance. And then we can, of course, we can play around a bit. We already see that it validates a datetime. So I put in a character here. It will not validate because it's not a valid datetime. We see here that it proposed to me additional attributes that I can add, elements. So I have feed type, for example, that I can just double click to get added and call that level A or something, it's a string. And if we add another one, what will happen then? That shouldn't be allowed, so and it isn't. I have validation on while I'm writing, so you see it directly. But this is not valid. So it checks data types and all the structured things so that the instance I have comply to the schema. So let's have a look at the level B instead. See how that looks. Closing down this. Okay, to take it the other one. And here I have prepared an example, so we just will look at them because the principle is the same if you like to create it from scratch. And here it actually shows directly a validation error, but now it's not an error, it's a warning. And that is actually, I think, a bug in XML Spy. This is the latest version, and the version before this was not a problem. So we just ignore this validation warning. And if you look at this level B, we see that we have the namespace for the extension included. That's the difference. And then we have the extension here with the greeting message, hello world. And except for the warning, it validates. And what's interesting now is to check that does this validate against the level A schema? And we can do that by assign the level A schema. Just a warning saying that I already have a schema. And here it points to the level A schema. So I can just click yes. Okay, I mean. So now it points to the level A schema. And if I validate, it's green and validates, no problem. So that shows that even if I put in my extension here, it still validates against the level A. And for the level A instance, I can actually put in whatever I like here. So I can, for some reason you should, but you can enter any XML element here. Because from level A perspective, this is unknown, and you can put in whatever you like. So.
So that means that you cannot programmatically access the extension, Jonas, just to be sure.
Ah, we see that later on.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ian
can
is
do
showing
it
that
by
later.
parsing. Yeah, by parsing XML, you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you from it's not data bind, you can say.
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can and if you obviously, if as I said, or as Jonas said, is not this is not checked. This is just ignored. Yeah, and so you can put wrong things in there. If you validate the thing that he did against the original level B schema, it would have created the validation error.
Yep.
Yeah. But Jonas, what you could also show, it will not validate against the level B profile because you have the feed type in.
Yep. We should take the profile now. Let's open all the files here. So here we see the profile schema, and we saw that Joseph removed the feed type. So if I try to add the feed type, of course it will not find it, so it won't validate. So it tells me directly that this is not okay. Don't have to press validate, but I do it anyway. So that is not working, but that's as it should in this profile. I can just remove it.
So it is important that we stress that the compatibility is from the profile to the whole and not the other way around. Yeah, that's obvious.
Yeah. And we have the facets on the greeting. So now it's hello world, so it's fine, it's validating. But if I enter a number or something here, it should not validate. Perfect. So facets, of course, is included. We've seen that in the schema, so it's obviously working. And this, of course, also will validate against level A. I don't think we have to show it. It's obvious. And of course, as Joseph said, we can do a validation. We don't guarantee that the level B profile validates against this schema, this instance. Is it? Yeah. Anyway, because we don't guarantee interoperability between different level B profiles, only against the level A profile. Okay, so that's level B. I think it's not much more to say about that profile. And Joseph shows the schema, I think. Or we can take a look at it and see the extension where the facet is. It's here. So here we see the restriction and the pattern of the facet. Okay, so let's see how the level C looks like. And that is not much different anyway, but let's open it up. And I actually have two examples here. I can open both. I don't open the schema, so it's probably faster. The first example will be the generic publication, which is still included in the level C schema. And the second example would be another class, I think Joseph called it. And in general, it looks very similar to DATEX 2. But what's make it's not a DATEX message is, of course, the namespaces are different. So we will never validate against a level A. So, of course, if I try to assign this to, and this is as I said, the generic publication. And it's of course obvious that this will not validate in level A, but okay, let's do it.
That will validate because you have not used anything that is not level A in the instance, right?
This will not validate because a different namespace.
Yeah, the namespaces, but if you change that,
Yeah, then
change
it would
the
validate.
namespaces, this would validate, but the other, of course, would not. Yeah.
Yeah. So now you see complaints on all of everything because this is not according to the schema. And this is the second example, and this would use another class type. But here as well, the schema, the namespace is completely different with the level C.
But in that case, even if you would change the namespaces, then it would tell you that the class is not
exactly.
known. Yeah, so.
Exactly. This one you could hack if you change namespaces, but yeah. Okay, I think that is all for the XML examples.
Yeah, and as said, if you go to GitHub, you can play around with them yourselves and make some experiments.